Today we're going to be working on some variations of Adho Mukha Svanasana, downward facing dog pose. Another one of those poses like in a vinyasa or flow class that you might just kind of flop through kind of quickly and not really take the time to align. So a lot of people focus on getting their heels down to the ground, but in Hatha Yoga we always want to think about our spine first and foremost. So I'm going to give you a couple variations that help you first and foremost, lengthen the spine completely, and then sort of as a secondary thing, work on opening the backs of the legs. So we'll start down on the knees. We're going to come to child's pose, balasana. So big toes touch, knees out a little bit wider than the hips. Sink the hips back toward the heels, walk the hands forward, and lower the forehead down. Good. Now, I want you to start to engage into the palms, trying to send the hips just a little further back toward the heels. Good. Now, without lifting the hips at all, lift the gaze, walk your hands forward, but keep the hips back. Walk the hands forward as far as they'll go. Then lower the forehead back down. Spread nice and wide through all 10 fingers. Engage the palms down, engage the biceps and the armpits, draw in the lower ribs and the navel. And without changing the distance between your hands and your feet, start to lift onto your knees. Good. Tuck the toes behind you. Scoop in the belly. Lift your knees and press your hips up and back. Adho Mukha Svanasana, downward facing dog. Okay. Now again, people get really focused on trying to lower their heels all the way down. And a lot of times the sort of the counter to that is that we lose openness in the spine. We kind of start to hunch or just sort of jam ourselves into the posture. So for starters, I want you to bend both knees deeply. And then I want you to press into the palms to really lengthen the sides of the trunk up and back. Imagine your sits bones reaching straight up, but try not to collapse between the shoulder blades. Widen the shoulder blades, widen the collarbones. Extend the sides of the trunk up and back. Good. Now keep that straight spine, then you can work on straightening the legs a little bit. Good. We're going to draw forward, release the knees, big toes touch, and come back for a moment, balasana, child's pose. Good. Second time through, we're going to start off the same as the first from our child's pose. Press into the palms, send the hips back. Keep the hips back as you lift the gaze, walk your hands forward. So from here, you're already starting with a nice long torso. You can imagine sort of inching forward from the hips, lengthening the sides of the trunk all the way from the hip crease to the armpits. Then plug your shoulders back into their sockets. Without changing distance between hands and feet, lift onto the knees. Tuck the toes behind you. Pick up the knees. Lengthen the spine. Lift the sits bones up. And then work on straightening the legs. Good. Now to feel it a little bit differently, this time we're going to come up onto our tiptoes. Lift your hips as high as they'll go. Scoop your belly in. Think about the palms trying to push you away from the top of the mat. So the sternum is reaching toward the knees. Sits bones up, 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 as high as you can get them. Then try to keep the sits bones lifted as you press the heels down toward the mat. Good. Take a couple breaths. Sides of the trunk lengthen, navel draws in, thighs press back, heels press down. Then release. And find Balasana, child's pose. Good. We're going to walk up with our hands. For our third variation, we're going to use a wall, and we're going to use a couple bricks. And we're going to use that as a pressing point to help engage our shoulders, to plug our shoulders into their sockets, and from there to lengthen the spine and the sides of the trunk straight up and back. Oftentimes this will also help us sort of shorten that gap between the heels and the mat if a gap exists, but it definitely will help you keep sort of this straight 90-degree angle in the hips and the full back extension. So we're not rounding, we're not hunching, we're not crowding the ears with the shoulders. So we're going to take our two bricks and sort of angle them against the wall. Nice low angle. What would you call that? It's not quite 45. A little bit lower than that. And you're going to take them about shoulders width apart. And before we move, I want you to press on the bricks firmly to make sure that they are firmly established on the wall. Good. Now from here, before we move, you can press your hands down. Good. And feel the engagement in the shoulder girdle. Good. So we're gonna kind of have to adjust because this time we can't walk our hands forward, so we kind of have to walk our hips back and find our child's pose to start. Might take a little bit of trial and error, but find your child's pose to where when your hands are on your brick, your hips are toward your heels, the sides of your trunk are fully extended. Good. Engage the palms down, engage the armpits. And then without changing the distance between your hands and feet, lift onto the knees, tuck the toes behind you. Press down into the bricks as you lift the knees. Send the hips up. Send the heels down. Good. The belly scoops in. The low ribs draw in. The hands press firmly. The shoulders are in their sockets. So again, we're not crowding the ears. We're not hunching into the upper back. Back of the neck is long and free. Press down, 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 helping you lengthen straight up and back. Good. And as you're ready, release onto the knees. Release down into child's pose. This time we're going to walk the hands back toward the heels, palms face up. Let the shoulders rest completely. Walk up with the hands, find a seat. And that is Adho Mukha Svanasana, downward facing dog.